Greetings and welcome to another creative briefing. Good morning, good afternoon, good day to wherever you are in the world. Here in Southern California, it's a lovely hot summer's day. We're just getting over July 4th weekend. Hope you had a happy and safe July 4th if you were celebrating here in the US, or just enjoying a regular summer's day wherever else you are in the world. So creative briefing, this is an ad hoc, seat of the pants, make it up as I go along type of show. Some every other day, some days a week, semi-regular show that looks at creativity and what it means to be creative, and encouraging and motivating and inspiring anyone and everyone to explore their own creativity. And I try and find different ways to do that, usually with software tools, digital tools, with, graphics and music and video, or just through sketching or conceptual creativity. So today, going to look at Adobe Illustrator and going to create some text effects, or just create some text stylings that add a bit more punch to text beyond just, I don't know, drop shadows or fills and strokes or whatever simple text stylings you may be using. If you're a long-time user of Illustrator, you know that it's fantastic at really taking text to another level and adding dimension and like a production value, a richness to it. So if you're unfamiliar with Illustrator and you've played with Photoshop, this should be somewhat familiar to you. If you are completely unfamiliar, then just sort of follow along and see if there's something you might like to explore. Now, obviously, Adobe Illustrator comes with the Creative Cloud subscription, so that might be prohibitive for some. It's an expense, a monthly expense, but there are other vector illustration programs out there that are less outlay. They're not subscription based for one, and there are some that are even free. So the concept should still apply, if the tools might be slightly different, but the idea is that we're going to take our text, we're going to style it in a much more rich and deliciously tasty way to add a lot of production value to our graphic designs. Okay, so I just have a new Illustrator document open, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the T key to bring up the text tool and just create some text. So I'm just going to call this fancy logo, because why not? And Illustrator also always defaults to just this Myriad Pro 12 point. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to scale it up a bunch of times just so I can see what I'm doing, and then move that to the middle. The keyboard shortcuts for scaling up, for increasing you can just go here and make something one of the preset sizes, or the keyboard shortcut is Command Shift and period, or the angle bracket, and to increase, and Command Shift the left angle bracket to decrease. So those are really useful. I'll be sharing a lot of keyboard shortcuts because they really make efficiencies in workflow as you go through this. You're not sort of having to click into palettes or in menu systems using those keyboard shortcuts. So I'll share those as we go along and we come across them. So the first one, Command Shift, and the brackets here above the comma or the period, to increase and reduce the font size. So for a font, let's pick something, let's see, something kind of scripty. Oh yeah, I was using that earlier. Automobile. I'm not sure where this font came from. It's the font I have on my system that's kind of scripty. So as you can see, it's a little bit it's kind of a cool hand-drawn font, but it's the spacing and whatnot is all a little bit off. So let's sort that out before we go any further. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the cursor between the F and the A, and I'm going to hit the Option key, and I'm going to Option and then the left arrow on the extended keyboard. So I'm going to Option, and that is going to reduce, if I bring up the text, the character, so it's the kerning between the letter spacing. So I'm going to bring that up till it's decent, and there's a little bit of, you can see between the N and the C where the up swoosh of the N doesn't quite seamlessly connect to the C. I'm going to reduce that so that looks a little better. And I'm going to, between the O and the G, I'm going to increase that a little. And the L, I'm going to Command Shift and increase the font size just a couple of clicks. I don't want the font to get too heavy, just want to make it a little bit bigger. And I'm going to Option Shift and then the down arrow on the keypad, the arrows. I'm going to do Option Shift and then down, and that does the what they call the baseline shift. I'm going to bring that down until that O kind of sits nicely in that, and I'm going to Option left arrow again to reduce the kerning, just so that L kind of cuddles the O quite nicely. I'm not going to do the same with the F, because then the slash of the F. Now, I'm going to be a little bit brief. This is creative briefings. These are short tutorials. I could do the same thing with the F and, baseline shift that down, and I could then redraw the slash so that it didn't fall somewhere odd. If I just show this real quick, that F looks a little weird with the slash going into the A, so I'm going to undo that and undo that again and to leave that at that. Okay, I might reduce the L and the O kerning again, make sure that's even. Just keep playing with that until it looks and feels about right. Okay, then I'm going to hit the Escape key, not the Enter key. I get caught when I'm switching back between Photoshop and Illustrator. I get caught out between that all the time. I'll hit Enter when I should hit Escape, or I'll hit Escape when I should hit Enter, because thanks Adobe, you couldn't make your graphics tools consistent. Anyway, mini rant over. Let's hit Command Shift O to convert that font. Actually, let me undo that a second. Let's Option drag that up to the corner, and then I'm going to turn that layer off. I like to keep a backup of the font just in case I want to change anything later on. Now I have this. Now I can convert that to curves. Now it is no longer a font. I don't have any of the font typesetting tools, but I can, let me see, go into there. I'm going to use the Unite tool to convert that to a unified shape, and I'm going to hit Command 8, and now that is one compound path. This whole logo is now one compound path. You unify it with the Pathfinder tool, and then Command 8, which is the same as going to compound path make. So Command 8 is the shortcut for that. That's very, very useful. You'll be doing that a lot, especially when you're working with text. When you convert text to paths, each character, each letter is its own paths, and sometimes it could be multiple paths, and then you want to create just one uniform path. It makes it a lot easier to work with, and also for adding gradients and things like that. So I'm going to make that a little bit bigger, holding Option and Shift. It's going to scale it from the center just to fill that screen a little bit so we can see a bit better what we're doing. And first thing I want to do is go to Object, Envelope Distort with Warp. So what that's going to do, you've probably seen this if you've used this tool in Photoshop or in some of the text tools. You can also apply this to any graphic in Illustrator. It's got all these options for doing a warp distortion, and then we can, let's see, sometimes I like to add a tiny bit of horizontal distortion just to give it a little bit of curvature. Let's make that a little, yeah, just the tiniest amount of curve. Okay, like I said, just a tiny amount of curve to make it a little less just straight and angular. We're trying to recreate something that's got some energy, and the curve will help do that. It's going to help give it some energy. So you notice here, I sort of landed on 13%. I'm superstitious, and I have lots of OCD, and that will not allow me to enter a value of 13%. So I'll reduce that to 12 or increase it to 14. There are certain numbers that I like to use, 33, one because it's easy to hit 2 3s rather than going to 3 0 or 3 1. Hitting 3 3 or 2 2 or 5 5, those sorts of numbers are very easy to hit. So I'm kind of lazy like that. So those are some numerical tricks I like to use. Also the number 42, if we're in that sort of region, I'll hit 42, and if you're a reader of Douglas Adams, you'll know why. Okay, so moving on, I have rejected 13 and agreed upon 12. So what this does, now you have this envelope, and you can edit the envelope, or you can edit the contents of the envelope, but for the time being it's not really live paths, much in the way that fonts are not live paths. So it is live paths with an effect applied to it. So that becomes a little cumbersome. So what I want to do now is go to Object and Expand. And you want to expand the object and the fill. And now that curve has been, for some reason it's added into a group. So I'm just going to Command-Shift-G to ungroup that. Now we just have our compound path again with a slight loop. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hit the shear tool, and I'm going to click there to add the center point, and hold Shift, and I'm just going to sort of drag down a little bit and click at the bottom here, and then click at the top and just tweak that over just a little bit. So what I'm doing, I'm adding some shearing to it. By clicking first, it tells me where, you'll see the little blue anchor point. That's where it's going to shear from. So if I just hit it in the middle, it would shear, you know, opposite. If I click at the end, it's just going to shear in one direction, almost. That's almost a correct description, but it's the best I can do. But it just makes it a little less tweaky, for want of a better word. I always like to click at one extreme and then drag from the other extreme. So I'm going to rotate as well, and for the same thing, now I've got my rotation anchor point, and I'm just going to rotate down just a little bit. And now we have this scripty logo that is rising. It's got an arc to it, so it's got a little bit of energy, and it's got a little bit of style as opposed to just like a straight scripty text. So that's our layout done, and again, I'm being very quick, trying to be brief here. I could spend more time refining some of the subtle nuances of that, but for now, let's just sort of push on. So now we want to get into coloring the text. So let's pick a color. Let's pick something nice and warm. Let's do like a orange, maybe. I'm just going to use one of the stock colors in the swatch library for right now. Let's just do that. let's add a stroke. Add a stroke of something blue. And let's make the stroke, and we're going to align the stroke to the outside, which means the original shape is going to be the original shape, and any strokes will apply to the outer extremities. You can apply the stroke to the inside, in which case the original shape will be the original shape, and any strokes will be applied to the inside, so the original color will get choked, as you can see here. Or you can apply the stroke to the center, which, you know, sort of balances. It's a sort of compromise between the two. I always like to apply the stroke to the outside. We have the original shape, the font weight is retained, and you're adding sort of any sort of heaviness to the outer. So I like that, so we'll do that. Let's duplicate that by doing Command C, then Command F. Command F is paste in front, which means it's going to paste an exact duplicate on top of the original. If I did Command V, it'll just paste it anywhere, sort of in this random place. Usually I think it's at the dead center of the page, or dead center of the screen. But we want to have an exact duplicate right above, kind of like Command J does in Photoshop. Command F will paste this in front, so now I have an exact duplicate here. I can select this copy. Let's kill the stroke on that, and so I'm going to hit L to bring up the ellipse tool, and by hitting Option I'm going to draw an ellipse from the center. Now what I'm trying to do is get an ellipse that sort of matches the curvature of the logo. Now for a while I continue to hold Option and I'm still drawing this ellipse from the center. If I hit space I can reposition where that arc is. So I have an arc that's feels like it flows along with the logo. So there I have an ellipse that flows along with the logo, and if I shift click that, then go to the Pathfinder and then hit the intersect, what I have now is just the lower portion of the text, the font, the logo we designed, that follows the arc of that transform we did. So what I'm going to do here again is go to the Pathfinder and unify those, and do a Command 8 to convert those into just a one compound path for the whole thing. So now what I want to do is hit G to bring up the gradient tool, and you want to make sure you show the gradient annotator, and that will allow us to apply our gradient. So I'm just going to quickly draw, let me see, I want this to be a radial gradient, and now I can edit that gradient info. The center of the curve was round about here, and I want to squash that radius. I want to bring, again, I'm trying to match the curvature of the logo. So I'm going to rotate this a little bit. Let's bring this. So that seems pretty close. So now I have a gradient that is falls within an oval that is the same arc as our logo. So now I can edit that gradient. So I'm going to double click this, go to our swatches. That was like this yellow color. So I'm going to just warm that up a little bit. And going to do the same for this. That was this color. I'm going to tweak that color a little bit, a bit more warmth into that. Okay, so we have this gradient that follows the arc of the curvature, gets slightly darker towards the descenders, and is just a tone of a darker tint of the orange that we used. So it's getting there. It's got a bit more pizzazz, but let's and if this is too strong, we can always go to the transparency of that layer and then just reduce that if we need to blend in that gradient a little more. So we have that. So now we have the stroke. It's cool and all. We could always make that a gradient, but let's go to Object, Path, Outline Stroke, and we'll do Command-Shift-G so we can ungroup that. And now we have just this, and I'll turn this layer off for the time being. We have just this, just the outline. What I like to do, I'm going to hit the A key to bring up the direct selection tool and select one of the nodes on the inside, and then just start deleting the inside. So we just really have, rather than, and if I hit Command Y, I can then see the outlines contained in that. And I Command Y again, go back to the color, and I can see what that looks like. So visually it looks no different, but it will enable us to do other things later on. It's just a lot cleaner. Obviously there's less paths, so if you're doing like a massive project, you may have to worry about keeping paths to a minimum for efficiencies. So what we can do now, let's see, let's add a gradient to that. So I've got the foreground selected. I'm going to hit the gradient again. I'm going to do a radial gradient again. I'm going to bring up my G tool for the gradient widget, and I'm going to click in the same place and again modify that gradient curve. Just so we have a gradient that follows the similar, because you don't want, if we had a linear gradient, it would just go from dark to light down here, and then these would be at different, the gradient, the 50%, for example, would fall at a different position, so that A may be overall more darker than the O. So we're trying to basically keep the gradient consistent, so where that 50% mark falls, consistent among the letters. For a arc of this nature, it's very subtle, but still, it's these little details that add a lot to the production value. So if I go back to this and got our gradient, I'm going to edit this gradient and choose this sort of cyan blue we had. Maybe I'll do it slightly, there you go, maybe that's a little bit better. I'll modify that just a bit, so that's a little lighter. Okay, and then I will do the same on this side. I'll select this color, modify it a little more. So what I'm going to do is scale this up a little bit so that the extremities reach the tip of the blue rather than just the center as before, and I'm going to bring this up to about the bottom of the descenders. So now I have this gradient. So we have our gradient on the blue, we have our gradient on the front here. What else can we do? Let's take the blue, now that we've finished messing with it, and we're going to Command C, Command F, and we're going to select the back one. We're going to go Shift down arrow, left arrow, a couple of times, and I'm going to then Shift click the front and the back blue stroke. I'm going to go to Object, Blend, Make, and then Object, Blend, Options. Specified steps 20. That looks straight enough. That usually works. We can turn on. 20 usually works for text. For text objects like this, 20 steps in the blend is usually sufficient. So I'm going to go to Object, Expand, and Gradient Mesh. Okay, so let's with our blend now baked. Let's again go to the Pathfinder and unify that, and let's see, that's a couple of different objects. We're going to again Command 8 to join that, and there we have our gradient following the arc with a little bit of depth. Now we've added some depth to that. Let's select this foreground orange, and let's select the stroke color and give it a stroke of white. In the stroke tools, I'm going to set the outside to the outside alignment, and maybe I'll make that 0.75, so it's a little thin, and that's looking a lot nicer. So let's see, now we have our sheen over that. We can select this and maybe again reduce the opacity a little bit. We can select the orange logo, Command C, Command F, and I'm going to create another ellipse. Again, holding down the Option and using the space bar to reposition. Again, so that it feels like it's following the arc of the type, and I'm going to turn off everything, but that's what I want. So I'm going to select that one, shift select the ellipse, and once again go to the Pathfinder and select not intersect. So I'm going to select punch. Or trim. I'm going to punch out the ellipse from the, and then I'm going to unify that and Command 8 to turn it into a compound path. Now we have this little, that's my backup, which I'm going to lock. So then I have my top part of the font and I have the lower part of the font, and this one I'm going to add another gradient to, just the same as before. Actually, I'm going to turn off the white stroke and then I'm going to hit G to bring up the gradient tool. Of course it needs to be a gradient first, so let's bring this down here. The same rigmarole, a lot of repetition with this. Let's get a lot of repetition. There we go. Now we've got our gradient. I can then, let's go back to our oranges. Select the same orange. This time I'm going to make this one a little brighter. And then we can see about positioning the color swatches on the gradient. It's just going to have to be a little bit, because there we go. So there, okay. We've got our gradient that follows the arc again for our highlights. This I'm going to set to a blending mode of screen and reduce the opacity quite a lot. I just want to add a tiny bit of punch to the font. And so there we have a logo that's added some depth, we've added some gradients, we've added some highlights. Oh, that's one last thing. Let's do that. We haven't added any like specular highlights, but we've added, you know, a lot of production value. Could have finessed some of the nuances, but overall, these are the sort of techniques I will use for adding highlights, shadows, and depth. Just to take our fonts from just like a flat, two-dimensional, straight element to something that's got some energy in its shape, and then some production value with the colors and gradients and whatnot. So let's select our main. I'm going to turn these off just to avoid confusion. I'm going to make sure I select the right layer. I'm going to Command C, Command F again, and I'm going to do the same thing again, Command F one more time, and I'm going to nudge that down maybe 3 or 4 pixels, or 3 or 4 clicks, whatever you've set your increment to in your preferences. And actually, let's delete that. And even with that already, we have like this little stroke, so we have the white stroke on it. You can see it adds a little something, but that is not what we want. So I'm going to turn the stroke of that off, and now I've nudged that down and across 3 or 4 pixels. I'm going to Command C and Command F. I'm going to copy and paste that in front and nudge that down another 4 or 5 pixels, and I'm going to shift click both of those 2 nudged layers, and I'm going to go to the Pathfinder, and I'm going to punch out, and then I'm going to unify those and Command 8 to make them a compound path. And let's get a font that the color is already that orange color. So what we can do is just go to the transparency and make that, we'll screen that, and we can bring the color down, the opacity down a little bit, and so we now have this little highlight kicker. That's a very quick and crude way. You can go back in and if we were to look at these areas, you could go back in and finesse these. So I won't belabor that for now, you get the idea. That's a very quick and crude way for adding some highlights. And that layer really should be at the top of the stack, so that it is adding the sheen to the highlights and shadow areas too. So that is some quick and down and dirty and rather effective text effects in vector illustration programs like Adobe Illustrator. Even something simple and flat without the gradients can still look really nice. Okay, so I think that's been long enough. I hope you found that useful. Hope you had some fun following along. Take your text in Illustrator or any other vector drawing program to the next level with some of these techniques, and let me know how you get on. You can always drop me a line at any of the usual channels, and you can like, subscribe, and share if you feel so inclined. I would appreciate that, of course. Have any questions about either the tools, the keyboard shortcuts, or the techniques we used here today? Please, again, leave me a comment in the thread to the video, or reach out to me at any of these channels. Thanks for watching. Be creative, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks, bye-bye.